He built every tool, trained every person, stayed every late night, and when the promotion came, they gave it to someone who'd been there 4 months. The new manager's qualification? He shared a last name with the CEO. That was it. That was the entire resume. Then the nephew sent a company-wide email claiming credit for 6 years of someone else's work, in writing, to everyone, with his name on it. The developer said nothing. He just started documenting. And what happened next was so clean, so complete, it almost doesn't feel real. Hey guys, welcome back. I'm Hazel. Get your coffee, get comfortable, because today's story is about the most satisfying workplace revenge I have ever encountered. Ever. If you're new here, subscribe immediately. We cover revenge, drama, and people finally receiving exactly what they've earned. You are going to love it here. Let me introduce you to our protagonist. His name is Stellan, 31 years old, a self-taught software developer who joined his company 6 years ago as a junior hire. He came in with minimal experience but maximum work ethic. The kind of person who absorbs everything, asks smart questions, and quietly outgrows every room they enter. Within 18 months, Stellan had built the company's first internal project management tool from scratch, completely solo, nights and weekends included. The tool got adopted company-wide. Leadership loved it. They used it in client presentations. They called it a genuine competitive advantage. Stellan got a thank you email. Over 6 years, Stellan trained every single new developer who joined the team. He wrote the onboarding documentation. He built the internal wiki. He was the institutional memory. He also worked overtime, routinely, consistently, without additional compensation. His manager called it showing dedication. Stellan called it Tuesday. He built 3 major internal tools over 6 years, all of them actively used. All of them representing tens of thousands of dollars in saved external software costs. His colleagues relied on him completely. Junior developers called him before they called the help desk. New hires said he was gradicity that dusses cars mesapelsithluj. The reason I figured out how this place works? When the management position was posted internally, everyone, and I mean everyone, assumed it was Stellan's job. His teammates told him to his face, "It's obviously yours." 6 years of institutional knowledge, 6 years of building infrastructure, 6 years of training the people who would now theoretically report to him, open and shut. Except for one variable. The CEO, a man named Percival, had a nephew, 26 years old, 4 months at the company, degree in business administration. His name was Breck. Breck had spent those 4 months attending meetings, sending emails with lots of exclamation points, and learning what a sprint cycle was. Percival announced Breck's promotion in an all-hands meeting. He called it bringing in fresh leadership energy. The room went completely, uncomfortably silent. Stellan's colleagues looked at him immediately. He kept his face completely neutral, nodded once, said nothing, already beginning in his mind to calculate. After the meeting, a colleague found him at his desk and said, "That was absolutely wrong. Are you okay?" Stellan said, "Yeah, I'm fine. I'm thinking." Those 2 words, "I'm thinking," turned out to be the most consequential thing Stellan said for the next several weeks. Breck stepped into the role with the energy of someone who'd never once considered that he might not deserve something. Completely, insufferably confident. He redecorated the management office within his first week, put a whiteboard up, scheduled a team restructuring meeting, used the word synergy without irony. At his first team meeting, Breck gave a presentation on, quote, team vision. It contained several points that were directly lifted from a strategy doc Stellan had written 8 months prior. Stellan recognized every single line. He sat there, expression neutral, and made one small note in the margins of his notebook. The first piece of documentation. This is where the story turns, because at this exact moment, Stellan made a decision. He wasn't going to complain. He wasn't going to confront. He was going to collect. Every email, every commit log, every project file, every timestamp, every version history. Stellan began building a case with the precision of someone who'd thought about this carefully. For non-technical people, commit logs in software development are like a time-stamped diary of every single change ever made to a codebase. They are brutally objective evidence. Every commit shows exactly who wrote what, when they wrote it, and what it did. You cannot argue with a commit log. It does not have feelings or loyalties. 3 weeks into his tenure, Breck sent a company-wide email. The subject line read, "Exciting update on our internal platform, built by my team." The email described the project management tool, Stellan's tool, in glowing terms, attributed the architecture, the design, the execution entirely to our talented development team under my leadership. Stellan read it twice, forwarded it to his personal email immediately, added it to the folder. The folder was growing nicely. 3 colleagues messaged Stellan privately after that email. All versions of, "This is insane. He's taking credit for your work. Are you going to say something?" Stellan's response to all 3, "Not yet. That's it. 2 words. Not yet." Not yet is doing extraordinary work in this story, because Stellan wasn't passive. He was positioning. There's an enormous, crucial difference between those 2 things. Meanwhile, Breck was accelerating. He started referencing the platform I architected in executive meetings, started walking senior leadership through tools he had never once touched. And because leadership had no reason to question him, he was the nephew, he was the manager, he spoke confidently, they believed him. Completely. Stellan attended several of these meetings, sat there while his own work was described back to him by someone else, filed every instance away with clinical precision. Then came the catalyst. The company landed a meeting with a major potential client, a genuinely significant account. Breck was assigned to lead the technical presentation. The pitch was built around the internal tools, specifically around the project management platform, the crown jewel, Stellan's 6 years of weekend work. Breck spent 2 weeks preparing. He genuinely seemed to believe at this point that the narrative he'd constructed was real. That's a specific kind of self-deception. Stellan watched the preparation process. He was asked, by Breck, to assist with technical Q&A during the meeting, meaning do the actual expert work invisibly. The developer who built the entire system asked to sit quietly in the corner in case there were questions his manager couldn't answer about the tool he built alone. Stellan said yes, of course he did, because the client meeting was the stage he'd been quietly building toward. He just needed to let Breck set it up. The week before the meeting, Stellan finished compiling his documentation package. It was thorough, dated, cross-referenced, completely irrefutable. He drafted 3 emails. 1 to the client's procurement lead, whose contact information was on the pre-meeting correspondence. 1 to the company board. 1 to HR. Each email was different in tone but identical in substance. Here is the documented truth of who built what, when they built it, and what is currently being misrepresented. Attached to each email, the commit logs showing every contribution timestamped with his name, the original project files, the internal communications where leadership had praised him specifically. Also attached, Stellan's original design documentation, the architecture notes he'd written before a single line of code existed, signed, dated, saved in version control. The morning of the client presentation, Stellan arrived early, made coffee, set up his laptop, smiled at Breck when he walked in. "Ready for today?" Breck said. "Absolutely," said Stellan. The meeting began. The client's team, 4 people, including their CTO, were engaged and clearly interested. Breck launched into his presentation with total confidence. He described the platform's architecture, its efficiency gains, its scalability, the months of development work. He used the word "I" and "my team" interchangeably throughout. The clients were nodding, taking notes. The CTO asked a fairly technical question about how a specific module was structured. Breck paused, turned to Stellan. "You want to take that?" Stellan answered with complete fluency. Because it was his architecture. He'd designed the module being asked about on a Saturday afternoon 18 months ago. The CTO immediately directed his next 3 questions to Stellan, not to Breck, to Stellan, because technical people recognize technical fluency instantaneously. Breck smiled through it. But his smile was getting slightly tighter with each question that bypassed him. Stellan noticed. He answered everything thoroughly and precisely. The meeting ended positively. The client said they'd follow up within the week. Everyone shook hands. The moment the client's team left the building, Stellan went back to his desk. He opened the 3 pre-written emails. Read each one last time. And then, one by one, pressed send. To the client's CTO, to the board of directors, to HR, all within 4 minutes of the client team walking out the door. Then he picked up his bag, told a colleague he was stepping out for lunch, and went to get a sandwich. Completely calm, completely unbothered, completely done. The client's CTO received Stellan's email and responded within 40 minutes. He'd reviewed the attached commit logs. His response contained one sentence. "We need to discuss this." The board received theirs and immediately forwarded it to Percival, the CEO, Breck's uncle, with a request for an urgent explanation. HR received theirs and opened a formal inquiry before Stellan had finished his sandwich. By the time Stellan returned from lunch, 3 separate fires had ignited simultaneously, all from the same spark, all burning in the direction of the same person. Breck was called into Percival's office within the hour. This meeting, unlike his promotion announcement, had no all-hands audience. Just the 2 of them, and the documentation. Percival, for all his nepotism, was not stupid enough to ignore a board inquiry backed by time-stamped technical evidence. He had a business to protect, even from family. The client had sent a follow-up email to Percival directly, professionally worded, essentially asking, "Why did your manager present someone else's documented work as his own to us?" Because here's the thing about pitching to clients. If you're willing to lie about who built your tools, what else are you willing to lie about? The client was absolutely right to ask. HR's investigation moved quickly because the evidence required no interpretation. The commit logs were the commit logs, the dates were the dates, the emails were the emails. There was no alternate version of events available to Breck. He couldn't claim collaborative credit. The commit logs showed a single contributor. His name was not in them once. He apparently tried to argue that, as manager, the team's work is attributed to his leadership. HR told him very directly that this argument does not apply to work created before his employment began. The project management tool Breck had been claiming was built under his leadership was completed and deployed 8 months before he was hired. The timestamps confirmed this beyond any doubt. The board met that afternoon. The decision was made by end of business. Breck was terminated, effective immediately, for misrepresentation to clients and internal stakeholders. He was walked out. 4 months and one catastrophic miscalculation after arriving. His uncle signed the termination paperwork. That must have been an interesting family dinner. The news moved through the office at the speed of a group chat. By the following morning, every person in the building knew exactly what had happened and why. Stellan's teammates were, by all accounts, barely containing themselves. Several of them had been silently furious for weeks on his behalf. The relief was physical. Stellan, meanwhile, was at his desk, working. He hadn't told anyone in advance, hadn't celebrated, hadn't sent a single gloating message. He'd just handled it. The following day, Percival himself came to Stellan's desk, sat down in the chair across from him. This was reportedly the first time Percival had visited this section of the office in months. He apologized, said the promotion decision had been wrong, said Stellan's contributions were foundational to the company's success, the same contributions that had been invisible 3 weeks ago. Then he offered Stellan the management position, the same role he'd been passed over for, with a salary adjustment. He called it a long overdue correction. Stellan listened to the entire offer, thanked Percival sincerely, said he appreciated the acknowledgement, and then said he needed a few days to think about it. Those few days Stellan spent making one phone call to a competing firm that had reached out to him 8 months earlier with an offer he'd politely declined at the time. He called them back, explained he was now open to conversation. They had his portfolio on file. They'd been following his work, including the tools that had become somewhat publicly notable. The competing firm came back within 48 hours with an offer. It was, to be precise, almost exactly double his current salary, plus equity, plus an actual title. Stellan accepted. He then composed a polite, professional resignation letter addressed to Percival, thanking him for the learning experience and declining the management offer. The letter was 1 paragraph, gracious, clear, and completely final. He gave 2 weeks' notice, used those 2 weeks to document everything he'd been working on for handover. Because even in leaving, Stellan was professional. He documented everything meticulously, left every system in perfect order. He was not petty, he was complete. On his last day, his teammates organized a small farewell. Several of them were visibly emotional. One junior developer said, "You taught me everything I know about how to work here." Stellan walked out of that building with his plant, his monitor stand, and his dignity entirely intact. The company he was walking into was paying twice as much to keep it that way. Okay, I need a moment. I need several moments, actually, because this story is operating on a level of composure and strategy that genuinely makes me feel like I need to improve as a person. Let's break this down properly, because there are so many layers here and every single one of them deserves real examination. First, let's talk about what was actually happening in this company before Stellan's revenge, because the injustice here goes deeper than just one bad promotion decision. Stellan worked 6 years of overtime without additional pay, built tools that saved the company significant money, trained every new hire, and received what exactly? A thank you email for an internal tool they proudly showed clients that they called a genuine competitive advantage. A thank you email. This is a pattern that exists in far too many workplaces. The person who does the actual foundational work is chronically underlabeled, underpaid, and underpromoted compared to their actual contribution. It happens specifically to people like Stellan, technically brilliant, not politically aggressive, focused on building rather than performing. Companies rely on these people enormously and reward them poorly. There's a well-documented workplace bias. Visibility often matters more than contribution. The person who talks loudly in meetings gets promoted faster than the person quietly building the infrastructure. Breck understood this instinctively, or rather, he exploited it without necessarily understanding it. He walked in, performed leadership, claimed credit loudly, and assumed that would be sufficient. And for a while, it was sufficient, because nobody in leadership looked past the performance. Confidence read as competence, volume read as substance, until the documentation appeared. This is the central lesson of Stellan's strategy. Performance can be sustained indefinitely in the absence of evidence. The moment objective evidence appears, performance collapses instantly. Commit logs don't care about confidence. They don't respond to charm. They don't defer to job titles. They simply record who did what and when. They are the perfect witness. And this is why Stellan's patience was so specifically genius. He didn't fight performance with argument. He let performance run until it ran into something immovable. Then he introduced the immovable thing. The client meeting was that immovable thing. Because Breck, pitching to a major client, based on fabricated credit, created real stakes. Not internal drama, actual business consequences. The moment Breck misrepresented authorship to an external client, this stopped being a personal grievance and became a professional integrity issue with real contractual implications. A client who signs a contract based on a vendor's claimed capabilities that turn out to be attributed to a person no longer in the organization, has grounds for serious recourse. That's why the board moved so quickly. This wasn't about Stellan's hurt feelings. This was about a misrepresentation to a potential client that had now been documented and delivered to their inbox. Percival might have protected Breck in an internal conflict, but he could not protect him from a documented misrepresentation to an external client. The business came first. It had to. And honestly, that's where nepotism always has its limit. You can hire your nephew. You can promote your nephew. You cannot survive your nephew lying to your major clients. The math stops working. Let's talk about Breck specifically for a moment, because his psychology here is genuinely fascinating and worth unpacking properly. Breck grew up almost certainly in an environment where his family connection opened doors automatically, where effort was less important than access, where outcomes were pre-arranged. This produces a specific kind of person, not necessarily malicious, but genuinely unable to perceive the gap between what they've done and what they've been given credit for. Breck may have, at some level, genuinely believed that his role as manager meant the team's work was his work. That attribution flows upward, automatically with a title. There are managers who believe this sincerely, who think I lead the team, therefore the output is mine to present. This is both common and completely, demonstrably wrong. Good managers build visibility for their team. They say, Stellan built this, not my team built this, and certainly not I built this. The distinction is enormous. Breck had no idea it existed. He also had 4 months of experience to draw on when navigating a CTO's technical questions. 4 months versus Stellan's 6 years of actual architecture knowledge. That moment in the client meeting, when the CTO's questions started naturally gravitating towards Stellan, was the first crack of daylight. Technical people always find technical people. You can't fake deep technical knowledge in front of a CTO asking specific architecture questions. Breck knew this on some level. That's why he'd brought Stellan to the meeting at all. Think about that irony. Breck brought Stellan to the client meeting to field questions he couldn't answer about a system Stellan built. He brought the evidence of his own deception to the room. He genuinely handed Stellan the stage at his own performance. I cannot stress enough how beautifully, perfectly ironic that specific detail is. Now let's talk about Stellan's composure, because I think it's the most instructive element of this entire story, and it deserves serious psychological examination. When Stellan heard that promotion announcement, when the room went silent and everyone looked at him, he had a choice: react emotionally or respond strategically. He chose the latter. This is not the same as suppressing anger. Stellan was almost certainly furious. 6 years of contribution dismissed for a 4-month nephew. Any reasonable person would be. But he channeled that anger into something useful, a documentation project. He converted an emotional injury into a methodical activity. That's a genuinely sophisticated emotional skill. There's real psychological research on this. Converting emotional pain into goal-directed behavior not only produces better outcomes, it also reduces the psychological damage of the original injury. Every email Stellan saved, every commit log he exported, every file he labeled, it was action, forward momentum. He wasn't sitting in his grief, he was building something with it. And here's what that patience brought him: the ability to wait for the perfect moment. Not just any confrontation, the confrontation that would matter most, with the audience that had the most power. A complaint to HR in week 1 would have been a he said situation, uncomfortable for HR, defensible for Breck, manageable for Percival. Probably nothing would have changed. But a documented package delivered to an external client, the board, and HR simultaneously, on the day of a major client presentation, is an entirely different category of event. Stellan essentially created a 3-front problem that all required urgent attention at the same time. HR couldn't quietly delay while the client was asking questions. The board couldn't wait. This is advanced. This is genuinely sophisticated crisis engineering. He didn't just present evidence. He presented it to exactly the right people, in exactly the right order, at exactly the right moment. I want to be very clear, Stellan did nothing unethical. He shared truthful documentation about his own work to people with a legitimate interest in knowing the truth. That's it. Completely clean. He didn't lie. He didn't fabricate. He didn't exaggerate. He simply ensured that the truth reached the people it needed to reach before a major business transaction was completed under false pretenses. The truth was the weapon. He just sharpened it, timed it, and delivered it to people who had both the standing and the motivation to act on it. Brilliant and completely justified. And then the finale. He turned down the management offer. Let's sit with that for a second, because I think some people miss why this is the most powerful move of all. Percival came to Stellan's desk, hat in hand, offered the exact thing Stellan had been passed over for: a correction, an acknowledgement, a restored opportunity. And Stellan said, "No, thank you." Because he had done the math. And the math told him that this company had shown him who it was, and a belated correction doesn't change the character of the organization. The problem at this company wasn't just Breck. Breck was a symptom. The problem was a CEO willing to install an unqualified family member into a senior role over 6 years of earned contribution. That culture, where family connection outweighs demonstrated performance, doesn't disappear because one bad hire gets terminated. The person who made the hire is still running the company. Percival would still be making decisions, still potentially prioritizing family loyalty over merit, still capable of doing this again to Stellan or someone else at any future moment. Why would Stellan trust that system with his career a second time? Why would he build more tools, train more people, work more overtime for a company that had already told him his value was optional? The doubled salary from the competitor wasn't just about money, it was confirmation. Somebody else recognized his value accurately, without needing a scandal to prompt the recognition. That's the fundamental difference. His old company needed to be embarrassed into acknowledging him. His new company reached out 8 months prior, unprompted, because they'd followed his work. One company saw him clearly from the outside. One company needed a crisis to see him from the inside. That tells you everything about which environment deserves your best work. I want to address something directly, because I think it's important and often missing from conversations about stories like this. There are millions of Stellans in workplaces right now. People doing the foundational work, training the new hires, building the infrastructure, being chronically, systematically overlooked. Most of them will never have a Breck, a catalyst obvious enough to force the issue. Most of them will just quietly continue being undervalued until they leave or burn out. And that's the real workplace tragedy. Not the dramatic version Stellan experienced, but the slow, undramatic version where good people stop trying because nobody is watching. Stellan's most transferable lesson isn't wait for revenge. It's document your work always, not as a trap, as a professional record. Your contributions should never exist only in someone else's memory. Keep records of what you built. Save the emails where people praised your work. Maintain version control. Build a portfolio. This isn't paranoia, it's professional self-preservation. And the second lesson? Visibility is not arrogance. Stellan was so focused on building that he never focused on being seen building. That's a balance worth finding deliberately. There's a version of this story where Stellan regularly communicated his contributions upward, not boastfully, but clearly, and Breck would have had far less empty space to fill with invented credit. Document for yourself and make your work visible in real time. These are not mutually exclusive. Doing great work in complete silence is a gift to people who take credit for things. But let me be absolutely clear. None of that reduces Breck's culpability by a single degree. Stellan should never have been in a position requiring a strategic revenge in the first place. The failure here is organizational. Leadership failed to see, reward, and protect a genuinely valuable employee for 6 years. That's not Stellan's failure to advocate. That's a company failing its people. And they lost him. Completely, irreversibly, doubled his salary for a competitor, took all 6 years of institutional knowledge with him when he walked out the door. The competitor who hired Stellan didn't just hire a developer. They hired someone who already knew how to build the specific class of internal tools their industry needs. At half the market rate, relatively speaking, Stellan's old company then had to replace him. A person who had 6 years of proprietary institutional knowledge, who had built tools nobody else fully understood. Good luck with that job posting. Here's the beautiful final irony. The tools Stellan built are probably still running at that company, every day, being used by people who may not know his name, but they're his, permanently, in every log. So here's my question for the comments, and I genuinely want to know. Have you ever been a Stellan? Undervalued, overlooked, and quietly building while someone else took the credit? Tell me your story. And if this one gave you chills, subscribe. I'm Hazel. I'll see you next time.